They did it again. They did it again. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Nikon has recently issued a recall on Nikon Z6 and Nikon Z7 cameras. It's not all cameras, but they're saying certain serial numbers were affected. The only way for you to find out is if you click the link below and see if your serial number was affected. More on that later. This is my experience with this Z6. I ordered this camera from B&H Photo. It arrived probably the Monday before the new IAF firmware update from Nikon. And I was excited to receive it. I got it, I threw a battery in it, started running around, taking photographs of my kids just before they got ready for bed. And for whatever reason, I just couldn't get a sharp photo of them. And when I mean sharp, I mean the eyes. Like, you know, as someone that photographs people for a living, you know, I know a photo that's out of focus and one that's sharp. And I just couldn't get one of them. And I figured, well, maybe it's because I'm cranking the ISO up to 8 or 10,000, and I'll try again in the morning. You know, maybe I'll mess around with some of the different modes, single versus continuous, dynamic AF, wide, face detection, whatever. Maybe it's some stuff in this new camera that, you know, I need to figure out. And so after going online and looking at a bunch of tutorials, trying to figure out was there something I'm missing to where I'm not getting sharp photos, I realized that I had tried everything. And I even tried to do the autofocus fine tune. But the problem was, it wasn't a scenario where their ear was sharp and their eyes were out of focus, or their eyes were out of focus and their nose was in focus. It wasn't a fine tune issue. It was just that in general, there was a general blur over their face, kind of like someone had applied sort of a Gaussian blur filter in Photoshop. Not super high, but just high enough to where the photos were unsharp. The next day, I photographed my kids as we were getting in the car heading to daycare. Rolled down the windows in the car, waved at my little girl, said, you know, look at daddy, smile for the camera, whatever. And same thing, like the photos were just blurry. The shutter speed was high enough, the ISO was much lower than the night before, and I just couldn't figure out what was going on. I called back B&H and I said, you know, have you had any issues with the FTZ adapter? Because I thought maybe it was a bad FTZ adapter. So I called up a buddy of mine that's got a Z7. We were going to meet over the weekend, and I was going to try out his adapter to see. And then about an hour or so after I got off the phone with B&H, someone sent me a link that said Nikon is recalling the Z6 and Z7 cameras. And there's an issue with in-body stabilization. And this made perfect sense because when I was on the phone with B&H, I said to him, you know, it looks like there's sort of a VR issue because in the past, I've owned the 24 to 120 VR lens from Nikon, the f4 version. It was a great lens, but over the course of the 5 years that I owned it, it broke twice. And the VR motor in it went bad, and I sent it off to the Nikon, and it was replaced under warranty. But those photos look very similar to the photos that I was getting out of this camera. And when I was on the phone with B&H, I said, hey, is there any type of IBIS problem or something? And at the time, Nikon hadn't announced it, but sure enough, that's what happened. And I realized that the photos I was getting out of this were the same as the photos that I was getting using that broken 24 to 120 VR lens. If you have an issue with a lens that has VR, you can send that off to be repaired and you can continue to use your camera with a whole bunch of other lenses. But if your camera breaks, then that basically renders all of your lenses useless. If your camera doesn't work, then it doesn't matter what your lenses are doing. I'm just so sick of this with Nikon right now. You know, I wanted to get this camera. I got a little external monitor to go along with it. I was going to do a video talking about the new Nikon AF and what I thought about it, but I can't even get a photo to be sharp and in focus. I mean, let alone talk about the new IAF. I mean, I was watching Jared Poland's video on it the other day, and by the way, he did a great job. If you hadn't seen it, go check it out. And towards the end of the video, he was comparing the Nikon, the Sony, and the Canon. And he said, now, remember, Sony is like a college graduate. They've been doing this for a while. This is generation 3, whatever. It's fantastic. And Nikon is kind of like a newborn baby or something. Like they're just taking baby steps. They're learning to walk. And I got what he was saying, but we can't keep looking at Nikon like they're some little newborn baby. Like, they're one of the largest camera manufacturers in the world. They've been around for, I don't even know how long. And they've had mirrorless cameras before. They had, was it the V1 or J1 years ago? They've had the technology. And for them to, you know, come out with the camera and the in-body stabilization has issues in their first generation, like, it just doesn't make sense. I can't keep looking at them like there's some company that was on Kickstarter and, hey, we're going to try and come out with a camera to compete with Sony. No, you don't get that benefit. Like, and that's why I'm switching. All of my stuff's going to be on eBay by the end of the week. You know, I'll jump over to Sony. It's going to cost me somewhere between, like, I don't know, $7,000 to $10,000 in terms of making that leap. But I'd rather do it now versus in a couple of years it may cost me $15,000 or $20,000 once all my Nikon gear isn't worth anything. Nikon, they did it again. I mean, it's a brand new camera. I mean, that was purchased a few days ago. And it's not even in the system as having a problem. So either they don't know about it, or maybe there's another issue with this camera that's going to come out in a couple of days in some recall or something like that. Or maybe all 3 of my lenses just have problems. You know, that might be the 1% that, you know, maybe this camera doesn't have IBIS issues. I've just got 3 bad lenses that work perfectly fine on my other cameras. I feel bad for a lot of you guys out there. I mean, anybody that purchased their camera when it first came out or that has been using it for a while now and was having issues, maybe their photos just weren't as sharp as they should have been. And I mean, those are some moments that you may not be able to get back. I mean, what if you were a wedding photographer or someone that shoots corporate events to where, you know, at the end of it, your photos are unsharp and you just couldn't figure out why. And then all of a sudden, oh, by the way, we've got an IBIS issue that we're going to recall, send it in and get it fixed. Like, I would be livid. Like those, I mean, someone could spend thousands of dollars hiring you and then you deliver, you know, blurry images through no fault of your own just because this thing messed up. And IBIS issues are tough to detect when you're actually shooting. The photos will be a little blurry and then you start second guessing yourself. You're like, maybe it's the shutter speed, maybe it's the ISO, maybe, you know, maybe my lens is acting up. You just don't know until after the fact a lot of times when you're looking at the photos on the computer and you're like, what did I do wrong? And then all of a sudden the camera manufacturer comes out with a recall and you're like, crap. And some people, you know, they switched already. They sold all their full frame stuff and, you know, are out there shooting events with 2 or 3 of these. And that's scary because even if you're not involved in the recall, does this really give you any confidence going forward? I mean, what happens after you get out of that 1-year warranty window to where you can't send it back? What happens if, you know, maybe you weren't part of the bad batch of affected cameras, but yours went out anyway? What's this going to cost to repair when it's out of warranty? There's so many questions that go along with this to where, like, I'm not taking that risk. I'm done. I'm out. Like Nikon, it was fun while it lasted. We had some great times together. You know, I'm thankful for what you did to the industry, pushing, you know, 36 megapixels with the D800, even though that had issues too. But like, competition within the industry is good because it forces all 3 of the main manufacturers and some of the smaller ones to keep coming out with innovative stuff. But I can't keep giving my money to a company that keeps putting out products that you know, have issues and need to be recalled and all this other stuff. And I know Sony, Canon, whatever, if you search long enough, they've probably had issues with other things too. But right now, Sony's winning the IAF game. Like, their autofocus in terms of mirrorless is the best there is, and I have no reason to believe it's not going to get better going forward. Lastly, if you have any questions or comments, leave them below. If you want to know what settings I was using or anything that I didn't go over in this video that you'd like to know about, just comment below. If you haven't already, you know, please subscribe to the channel. I'd like to do more reviews going forward. Hopefully not like this where we're covering issues with things, but, you know, hopefully in the future we'll be talking about stuff that works.